Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, my hunters. We have finally made it out of the Harrington and Dougherty part of the witness statements. So we are going to be on to episode 3. So let's get ready. William H. Medley, Fall River, August 4th, 1892. Called to the marshal's office in a hurry at 11:30 from my beat. It might have been a few minutes earlier. Jumped in a team, and was soon at the office. I was then ordered to the Borden homestead on 2nd Street. On arrival there, I found Andrew J. Borden and his wife dead. Had a talk with Lizzie about the deaths of her parents. I asked her where she was when this thing happened. She said she was upstairs in the barn. On coming into the house, found her father all cut and bleeding on the lounge. She then called Maggie and then Mrs. Churchill. She did not have any idea who could have done it. I inquired about some clothes, which looked to me like small towels. They were covered with blood, and in a pail half filled with water, and in the wash cellar. She said that was all right. She had told the doctor all about it. I then asked her how long the pail and its contents had been there, and she said 3 or 4 days. I asked the doctor about it, and he said it had been explained to him and was all right. I then had a talk with Bridget about the pail and its contents. She said she had not noticed the pail until that day, and it could not have been there 2 days before, or she would have seen it, and put the contents in the wash, as that was the day she had done the washing. She said shortly after Mr. Borden came in, she went to her room, and had not been there but a little while when Lizzie called her down, saying someone had killed her father. She did not tell me what she was doing in her room. I went at once upstairs in the barn, but found no footprints in the dust, except what I made myself. So you can notice now that we started with William H. Medley that we've gone back in time because it's a new officer's witness statement. And just as a brief reminder, the witness statements are not necessarily what the witnesses said. The witness statements are what the officers observed during the course of the investigation and during the course of their interviews of the witnesses. When I think of a witness statement, I think of I go into, I guess, like a police station and I write down or type up everything that I saw and heard. Or maybe I do it on some sort of video or something. I don't think of a witness statement as what the officer saw and heard. Fall River, August 4th, 1892. John B. Moore stated to me that he left the Borden homestead on 2nd Street at about 8:50 and went to see a nephew and niece whom he had never seen before. So he said, who were stopping at Mr. Emery's at number 4 Way Bossett Street. Mr. Moore said he went there and remained until 11:30, arriving there at about 9:30. Leaving number 4 Way Bossett at 11:30, he said he took a streetcar going directly back to the Borden home, arriving there about 11:50 when he found that Mr. and Mrs. Borden had been murdered. That was the first he knew of it. He told reporter Porter, oh, that's taken me a second there. Okay. I'm assuming that's not one of the many typos in this. He told reporter Porter of the Daily Globe that the first he knew of it was when he was telephoned for. To prove the truth or fallacy of his statement, I went to the home of Mr. Emery at number 4 Way Bossett Street. Mrs. Emery said Mr. Morse did come here about 9:40 and left there at 11:20 or thereabouts. That he did meet his nephew and niece. She also said Mr. Morse had not been to their house before in several years. She asked him to remain for dinner, but he declined, saying something about going to New Bedford, to which place they understood he was going after leaving the house. He left by the front door, but she does not know whether or not he took a streetcar. Fall River, August 4th, 1892. Went at 9:30 at night with Officer Connors to New Bedford to ascertain the whereabouts of a man who offered a Frenchman living on Jinks Street $4 to carry him to New Bedford. This man is said to have got into the Frenchman's team near 8 Rod Way on Pleasant Street, and is said to have acted strangely. His description is given as follows: height 5'9" or 10, weight 175. Dark complexion, broad shoulders, wore dark clothes. The Frenchman declined to carry him to New Bedford, and the man went off, after inquiring where he might get a drink. We followed from one saloon to another until we arrived outside the city limits. Going to New Bedford, 10 hours incessant work failed to find any such person, and now I doubt the truthfulness of the Frenchman's story. That has got to suck. You're following a lead, and for 10 hours, I guess you're bar hopping for 10 hours. So depending on your personality, that may not be a bad thing. But he also shouldn't be drinking since he's on duty. I wonder if that was a thing in 1892, that you're not allowed to drink while on duty as a police officer. But yeah, he has to follow up this one lead for 10 hours, and he's like, yeah, this guy doesn't exist. So it looks like we were lied to. Fall River, August 7th, 1892. Andrew J. Borden visited the Union Saving Bank about 9:30 Thursday and explained to Mr. A.C. Hart the reason of his, Mr. Borden's, inability to attend a meeting of the board of directors, which, B said, was because he did not feel well. He remained but a few minutes and went north from the bank. He was alone when he came and went from the bank. Mr. Everett Cook of the First National Bank gives the following statement. Andrew J. Borden came to this bank somewhere about 10 o'clock. It might be as early as 9:50. He does his business with us. That morning he deposited a check which was made payable to him by the Troy Mills. While making this deposit, Mr. William Carr came in. They talked together a few minutes, and Mr. Borden left the bank. He was there not more than 10 minutes. While he was here, I noticed that he looked tired and sick. Knowing him so well, I could not help noticing that he looked real sick. I did not speak to him about it because I thought he might consider it none of my business. He was alone when he came and went away from the bank. So this statement of being sick kind of reminds me back of when they mentioned about the poison. They had been following up leads at one point about a possible poisoning, saying that the whole family had been ill. And it looks like Mr. Borden had been sick for a while. On a fun note, historically, women are more likely to kill by poison than they are through violent crime. Not that we're not capable of it. We just tend to prefer to murder by poison. John T. Burrell, cashier of the Union National Bank, makes the following statement. Andrew J. Borden came into the bank as near as we can place the time, about 10 o'clock. He went to the rear of the bank and looked in the rooms, probably for Mr. Hart, and finding no one went out, remarking something about calling again. He did not call again. He was alone. Edith Francis, clerk for C.C. Cooks, makes the following statement. I happened to be looking out of the window of our office in Mr. Borden's block on South Main Street Thursday morning, shortly after 10 o'clock, and saw Mr. Borden going south on South Main Street, walking on the east side of the street. He looked up at the building, but kept right on. He was alone at that time. He is very direction oriented. So if you do feel so inclined as to bring up a Sanborn map, they do have Borden's block on there, and I do remember seeing South Main Street. A few of these other businesses I also remember seeing, like the Ice House. The lumber mill was on there. So it would be fun to go and kind of like pull those up and plot them out. It would definitely be a labor of love to do that. Charles C. Cook made the following statement. I'm a business manager for Mr. Andrew J. Borden for the Borden block. I did not see Mr. Borden Thursday. I have had charge of the block since it was built. He used to come in once in a while, but not every day, nearly always alone. The only other person who ever came with him was his wife, excepting once when Lizzie came with him to sign a deed conveying some property she owned to her father. This property was owned jointly by the two sisters and was situated on Ferry Street. Lizzie had been there 3 or 4 times. Once came to ask me about the value of the property she was going to convey to her father. I told her. She went away. Mr. Cook, have you any reason to believe Mr. Borden had or had not made a will? I think Mr. Borden had made a will, unless it had been made recently. I will tell you how I know. He came to my office one day when I was writing and waited until I finished. When I told him I was just writing a will, he said, "Charles, do you know that is something I have never done yet, but I must attend to? Mr. Cook, do you know of anything that would lead you to imagine that Lizzie and her father did not get along well together?" "I do not like to answer that question on account of my position as custodian of property, as I do not know what relations may be with the family when this thing is settled." "Would you be willing to answer that question in strict confidence to the city marshal?" "Yes, sir, I would." Fall River, August 5th, 1892. In accordance with instructions, I visited New Bedford. I find that Lizzie Borden arrived in that city on Thursday, July 21st, and went to Mrs. Poole's, the mother of a friend, a former schoolmate, living near South Water Street. While there, she never went out alone, always going in the company of family, with one exception, that being Saturday morning, July 23rd, when she went on the street to buy a piece of dress goods of some cheap material. Being gone but 1 and 30 minutes, she went alone and returned alone. No one called to see her while there. She never made mention of her family affairs. On Tuesday, Lizzie, Mrs. Poole, and Mrs. Poole's daughter went to ride to Westport to see Mrs. Poole's daughter, who was a schoolmate of Lizzie's, and who is now married to Cyrus W. Tripp. They spent the day there, leaving time enough for Lizzie to connect with train at New Bedford for Fall River. That was the last time the Poole saw her. While at Westport, Lizzie saw no one outside of the family. Made this visit to New Bedford, August 7th. Fall River, August 8th, 1892. Paid a visit to Mrs. Cyrus W. Tripp at her home in Westport on August 7th, 1892. In reply to my question, she made the following statement. "Lizzie told me she thought her stepmother was deceitful, being one thing to her face and another to her back. Lizzie told me her stepmother claimed not to have any influence with her father, but she must have influence with my father, or she would not have given my stepmother's half-sister such a large sum of money. She said, I do not know that my sister or I would get anything in the event of my father's death." This conversation took place at different times during former visits, nothing being said during her visit July 26th. Make a will, people. Just make it easy on everybody. Make a will. Fall River, August 9th, 1892. Went with Officer Harrington to one of John S. Brayton's farms near Gardner's Neck, and there found a Portuguese family named Joseph Sylvia. It was reported by Mr. Brightman that while working there on Friday the 5th, he had noticed an axe covered with blood in porch of the house. Investigation revealed that no member of the family were in Fall River on August 4th. The axe had never been out of their possession. The axe found lying on the woodpile was identified as one he saw by Mr. Brightman. There was no blood on the axe when found by us, and the family did not remember to have seen any. If there was blood on the axe at any time, it might be caused by the children having the nosebleed by falling down, which was frequently the case. There was no reason to doubt a word these people said. So since we have gone back in time, we are back at Joseph Sylvia's house, where people are like, yeah, he's got a bloody axe. You know what he also has is apparently 2 daughters covered in filthy, blood-stained dresses who have the nosebleed. They fall down, bleed everywhere, including on wood chopping axes. Fall River, August 10th, 1892. Went today to make measurements of the barn and its distances from the house. The nearest point of the barn to the back door of the house, about 22 feet. From the side or small door of the barn to the back door, about 41 feet. Space vacant in the barn when I made my examination, about 14 square feet. Found a box of leaf lead weighing perhaps 15 pounds at a distance of about 3 feet 2 inches from the door on the ground floor of the barn. Found a piece of lead pipe about 4 or 5 feet long laying on the ground floor of the barn. Distance from the door about 5 feet. This lead was in full view and could readily be seen by anyone. I saw this lead also on the afternoon of August 4th. So it looks like they're trying to prove or disprove on how far away Lizzie was from the parlor, or I guess from that house to the barn. Could she have heard anything? The thing that trips me up about this case is that there were 2 people in this house minimum. So you have not only the deceased, but you have Lizzie and Bridget in the house. So either they're in cahoots or they didn't do it. Because if you're trying to pin it on just one person, wouldn't Bridget be more likely, since the attack started upstairs and Bridget's like, I was upstairs when it happened. And then she came in and was like, my dad is dead. I was in the barn for 20 minutes doing stuff. The whole case is just weird. It really is. And everybody is pointing fingers at everybody. There's so much sus stuff going on right now. And if you are following along, filling out fan club forms, I'm going to say forms at this point because you have blown past just one form. And you are probably on 380 by now. There are so many people, so many dates. At this point, my trial hunters have probably resorted to creating a timeline. Genealogists, timelines can be really great if you haven't explored that concept before and using it in terms with genealogy. I know that companies like Ancestry kind of have a little scrolling timeline of main events, but you can create your own timeline. And in something like this, it would be pretty helpful. Fall River, August 13th, 1892. Went to New Bedford today to investigate about a man acting strangely in a druggist store on North 2nd Street, kept by William H. Drummond. This information was furnished by Stephen Sawyer of New Bedford, and turned out not to be worth the paper upon which it was written. A man stopped into the store, said he was hungry, bought a glass of soda and a few sticks of candy, lounged around the store a little while, looking once or twice up and down the street. He said he lived on Chestnut Street, Fairhaven, and went away. Description of the man: height 5 feet 6, age 45 or 50, complexion dark, wore blue clothes. I'm not sure what's suspicious. It sounds like some dude just wanted a snack, and so that's what he did. Chatted with the clerk for a little bit while he ate, and then went off to do his business. Fall River, September 2nd, 1892. In obedience to orders given to me on Monday last, I have visited Needham, Chestnut Hill, Boston, and other places, endeavoring to find or locate the man, Sam Robinsky. I'm not sure if they mean Robinsky or with the amount of errors, like that one, that they might mean Rubinsky. I am going to auto-correct this to Sam Rubinsky. Every place mentioned above was thoroughly worked, and we are satisfied that the man Rubinsky is absolutely unknown to the people of the places above mentioned. The letters which were said to have been delivered to a man of that name at the Needham post office last spring were not delivered last spring, but a year ago last spring, and the post office people have not seen or received anything from him since that time. For in remembrance of the name, they have nothing to govern them but their memories. And as so many Jews spell their name almost the same, the post office authorities admit their liability to err. Yeah. In company with Inspector J. Ryder of Station 1, I went to all the wholesale dealers in peddlers' supplies who are Jews themselves. They not only do not know of anyone of that name, but are willing to make an affidavit that they do not believe any such man lives in this state. Captain Kane of Station 1 put 4 men to work on the Jewish section, who made house-to-house canvass, using up 3 days, and this canvass failed to reveal anybody by the name of Rubinsky. Everywhere in police circles, the Rubinsky letter was considered a fake, pure and simple. So it's great that they are following up with the lead. I mean, they did spend 10 hours on a pub crawl on a lead just because the dude was sus. I'm not sure what this letter has to do with anything, though. A letter was supposedly delivered, but no, wait, it wasn't delivered this year. It was delivered last year. But we're going to go and investigate this letter that was delivered last year. But at least on the upside, they didn't just assume that this possibly fictitious person was guilty. And they're like, hey, everybody said this person doesn't exist. They made sworn affidavits that they did not exist. So, hey, it's fake. September 2nd, 1892. In pursuance of orders, I, this day, visited Mrs. John Marshall at Pawtucket. I was unable to secure an interview with her because Mr. Jennings had telephoned to allow no one to see her until he came on. I waited until next day, when Mr. Jennings and I had an interview with her, and she made the following statement. She was out riding in company with Mrs. Robert Marshall in Fall River on the 4th of August. They were going south through the 3rd Street about 11 o'clock, or a few minutes after. When opposite Dr. Conan's house, she saw a horse in a top buggy and a man standing beside it. He was not in a hurry, did not seem excited. No blood or anything on his clothing, nothing in his hands, but simply standing beside his carriage. And presently he got in, but did not notice which way he went. He had a red face. In concluding, she said, "That is all I know." September 8th. This day visited Mrs. Robert Marshall at the Mellon House. She is what I consider a very upright, conscientious woman. After calling in Assistant Marshal Fleet that he might be a witness to what was said, I inquired of Mrs. Robert Marshall if she concurred in the statement made by her mother-in-law. She said, "No, I cannot. I was with my mother-in-law on the 4th of August riding out. While I know it will make more or less feeling in my family, yet I must tell the truth, and I cannot say that I saw anything at all either on 3rd Street or anywhere else that could be construed into a suspicious circumstance. While on 3rd Street in front of Dr. Conan's house, there was absolutely nothing at all. Neither did she call my attention to anything at all. When we passed the high school building, it was 10:45. She told me so herself. I am sorry I cannot agree with her, but it is my duty to tell that I honestly believe to be the truth. Now, it is perfectly possible that 2 people at the same place saw entirely different things. So it's possible that her mother-in-law did see someone there, and she wasn't like, hey, look, a guy outside a building doing nothing suspicious whatsoever. Would you really call that out? I mean, I guess it could make for an interesting day on how you annoy the person you're with when you keep calling out people and pointing them out of how they're doing absolutely nothing suspicious. So it's possible one is correct. It is possible both things are correct. One did see someone and one did not see someone. Fall River, September 13th, 1892. I have visited New Bedford, giving to the hardware store of Hillman and Vincent. Mr. Mark Vincent is the man who sold the axe of which I have before made mention, the purchase being made about 2 days before the murder. I took Mr. Vincent to see the Portuguese working at the slaughterhouse on the Davis farm, and who was well acquainted with Mr. Morse, but after a thorough look at the man, concluded that he was not the man. Neither had he ever noticed him in the store at any time. The Portuguese man had a distinctive look about him, and anyone seeing him once would know him again. This Portuguese claims never to have been in New Bedford, except on Sunday, at any time within 6 months. So I am assuming that this is a different Portuguese man than the one who withdrew the $60 from the bank. So far we've had at least 3 guys. We had Sylvia, who has the children with the nosebleeds. Then we have the guy who withdrew the $60. And now we have the guy who's working in the slaughterhouse. And they, other than Sylvia, they just refer to them as the Portuguese man. Then again, they also refer to the one guy as the French man. So I'm assuming these leads were very vague and bad. What's more interesting is that they knew of an axe, like the axe that they suspected. They're like, oh, I know that axe that is sold by such and such store. Even nowadays, how many stores are selling axes or other merchandise that you can find at multiple locations? Was Hillman and Vincent the only place who you would have bought an axe from? And that would be something that you could look in the city directory to find out. Fall River, September 12th, 1892. I visited Miss Lizzie Johnson of Myrick's on Saturday. She refused to make known to me the contents of the letter she received from Lizzie Borden on the day of the Borden murder, until she had consulted Mr. Jennings. I talked with her for 2 hours, but was unable to make her change her mind. She met Mr. Jennings Saturday night. I saw her again today, when she informed me that Mr. Jennings told her she need not tell me the contents of the letter if she did not want to, and she did not want to. I have seen the other girls who were at Marion at the time. None of them will talk. I have made all this known to Mr. Knowlton, and that gentleman instructed me to procure all their names and give them to you, in order that they may be summoned to appear before the grand jury. The names are as follows: Mary L. Holmes, Isabel J. Frazier, Lizzie Johnson, Louise Remington, Mabel H. Remington. I thoroughly support Lizzie Johnson's decision to talk to a lawyer. But obviously, Lizzie Johnson was a subscriber of Shut the Friday. And as anyone who is a subscriber of Shut the Friday, they know that Shut the Friday is every day. But it is a glorious day unless you've had time to talk to a lawyer. So it looks like all of her friends circled the bandwagon on this. And they're like, we're not talking. We talked to Lizzie's lawyer, Mr. Jennings. He said, we don't have to say anything if we don't want to. We don't want to. And the cops tried for 2 hours to convince her otherwise. On the 6th day of October, Curtis I. Peace of Westport came to Fall River and met Mr. A.J. Jennings. I was informed by Mr. Champlain of the Daily News that Peace was an old lover of Lizzie A. Borden. In order to sift the matter to the bottom, I commenced a thorough investigation. I found that Mr. Peace first met Lizzie Borden at the house of Mr. Tripp at Westport, about 10 years ago. At the time, Peace was a sort of itinerant preacher and was doing a little in that line in Westport at that time. While he was on speaking terms with her, yet there was not anything to indicate that Lizzie cared for him. I was told by Mrs. Tripp that Lizzie could hardly tolerate him. Mr. Peace told me he first met Lizzie at the home of the Tripps about 10 years ago, was not intimately acquainted with her, had not met her in over 4 years, and had not written to her in 2 years before the murder. He was not her lover, and never was. He never was to her house in his life, and did not know her people, either father, mother, or Emma, and had never seen or spoken to any of them. He did write to Lizzie since she was sent to Towton jail, and the letter was answered by Mr. Jennings. He never wrote to any member of Lizzie's family expressing regard for Lizzie or in any other way. The following is a copy of the letter sent by Mr. Peace to Lizzie. Westport, September 20, 1892. To Miss Lizzie, with friendly greetings, I am very anxious to meet you, and as I cannot presume upon your presence without your permission, will you be so kind as to appoint a day for me to visit you as soon as convenient? I can come any day or hour. Please not deny this one request. Believe me, you have my deepest sympathy and constant prayer. I am sincerely yours, Curtis I. Peace. Westport Box 34. Copy of letters sent by Andrew J. Jennings to Curtis I. Peace, Fall River, Massachusetts, September 24th, 1892. Mr. Curtis I. Peace, P.O. Box 34, Westport, Massachusetts. Dear Sir, your letter to Sheriff Wright unto Miss Lizzie A. Borden have been handed to me by the latter. For your sympathy, as for that of everybody else in her suffering, she is grateful, but she is at a loss to understand why you would presume upon her unfortunate position to open correspondence with her, or write to Sheriff Wright asking for an interview. She does not to see you, nor to receive letters from you. She has not, 'tis true, a father to appeal to, a family to compel you to cease your attempts to force yourself upon her notice. But there are others who can and will supply his place. She has told me of your previous contact, and I am surprised that any man should attempt to renew it under present circumstances. Yours truly, Andrew J. Jennings. I say, man, timing. It looks like he's into her. Maybe a little tip for our thirsty fellows out there. When a woman is accused of murder and she is currently in jail and you don't have a close relationship with her, at least according to her, you don't, it's probably not the best time to write to her in jail. She's going through some stuff and her mail is being read. Timing, dude. Timing. All right, everyone, that looks like a good stopping point. We will resume later on.